A gray courtyard just before sunrise, the air wet with mist and coal dust, boots on gravel. A side gate opens with a controlled scrape. 4 women step through, shawls drawn tight against the chill. The guard's ledger stays shut. No entries, no numbers. Just a nod. One of the women glances toward a row of low buildings. A chimney rises above them like a black metronome. Another woman closes her hand around a coin-sized charm hidden in her cuff, the metal colder than the morning. They are professionals, trained, briefed, tested. They have crossed frontiers by bicycle and by night. They have memorized codes and cover stories, and now they are stripped of the one protection that might save them, a name on a list. An officer's voice bounces off the walls. It's procedural, almost bored. The women exchange a look, a quick human flash, before the yard swallows the sound. Later, investigators will search for documents, signatures, stamps. Here there is only fog and the convenience of silence. The ledger never opens. Europe, 1941 to 1949. Publicly, the war's propaganda paints clear roles, heroes in uniform, flags draped over triumphs, victory posters of marching boots and raising standards. But step off the parade ground and into the corridors of security services, and clarity breaks apart. This episode asks a tight question with a narrow scope. In Nazi-occupied Europe during the final years of World War II, and in the Soviet zone immediately after, what punishments did captured women soldiers and agents face, and why did their cases so often slide outside the rules? We are not tracking every we're focusing on Western and Central Europe under German control from 1943 to 1945, and the Soviet Union's post-war filtration of returnees through 1946-49. Within that frame, we follow women who carried intelligence, resistance networks, combatants by mission, members by uniform. The contrast is stark. International law promised categories and protections. Reality offered labels that mean spy, partisan, and at an often weird night and fog. The geography of the punishments runs through cells at Ravensbrück, the transfer to Natzweiler, a dog courtyard at Dachau, and after liberation, interrogation rooms and Soviet filtration tools. Our working premise is precise, not conspiratorial. Records suggest that captured women combatants were frequently handled through exceptional channels, secret decrees, unregistered transfers, or reclassification, making their fates difficult to track and easier to delay. The consequences were final, and for many unseen, and the paperwork, what existed or what was withheld, decided everything. Many-click, the rules weren't broken, they were rewritten mid-sentence. We anchor the story with 4 checkable points, places, dates, and sources. Anchor 1, Natzweiler Strudhoff, July 6, 1944. 4 SOE agents, Andre Borel, Vera Lee, Diana Roden, and Sonia Olshanesky, are brought to this small camp in Alsace. Post-war testimonies indicate they were executed and cremated shortly after arrival. Witnesses reported that Berlin intended them to disappear without record. Notably, their names were not entered into the camp rolls. U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum overview of Natzweiler. Multiple testimonies summarized. See also memorial literature. Anchor 2, Ravensbrück, early February 1945. Violette Szabo, a British-French SOE agent captured in France, is executed at Ravensbrück. The Imperial War Museums and related documentation confirm her capture after a firefight near Limoges and her subsequent execution at Germany's largest women's concentration camp. Anchor 3, Dachau, 12 to 13 September 1944. Noor Inayat Khan, another SOE wireless operator, is transferred to Dachau with 3 companions and executed at dawn. The UK National Archives catalog entry, SOE files, and museum resources fix the date and confirm the transfer and killing. Anchor 4, Night and Fog. Decree, December 7, 1941. The Nacht und Nebel Directive authorizes the disappearance of dangerous resistors. No notifications, scant paperwork, deliberate uncertainty. It framed how many resistance fighters, women included, vanished into a system designed to erase them. U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum article. Forensic lexicon matters here. At Natzweiler, absence becomes evidence. No court roll, no prisoner number, a crematorium ledger without corresponding intake. Where entries exist, they're sparse. An RSHA transport note, an unusual routing, a cremation time with no body tag. At Ravensbrück, the cell building functioned as the administrative and punitive heart, 78 cells with its own records and gatekeeping regime. Finally, gender intersects with classification. German policy on Soviet POWs was already lethal. Scholarship indicates that while the Army High Command formally ordered former combatants to be treated as POWs, practice varied, and few survived to reach camps in Germany. That single line, few survived, reveals a gap between policy and unit-level behavior. Each anchor shows a mechanism. Secrecy decrees, self-defense transport without registration, and the fatal elasticity of non-combatants. stifles networks through fear. Secrecy. Fewer records mean fewer liabilities during post-war inquiries. Gendered contempt. Nazi propaganda vilifies women who fight as Flintenweiber, eroding any residual taboo against killing prisoners. On the stereotype's role in practice, scholars debate. It appears consistently in propaganda literature. Soviet post-war layer. Order number 270, Aug 16, 1941. Brand surrender as treason and underpins a post-war mindset. Returned POWs, men and women, require filtration to prove loyalty. NKVD filtration camps, orders of 1941, renamed 1945, process millions of repatriates. Outcomes range from release to labor battalions or transfer to the Gulag. Female combatants and couriers repatriated from the West are not exempt. Statistics vary by cohort and year. Cause-effect chain. A woman captured as a fighter is reclassified as spy or NN, moved through prison hubs, camp without registration, execution or prolonged cell imprisonment, post-war silence. If liberated in the East, the chain continues. Filtration interview, possible redrafting, labor or prosecution. Nuance note. Museum labels sometimes call any dark cell an oubliette. Strictly, an oubliette is a vertical drop dungeon. Ravensbrück's cells were conventional prison cells integrated into an administrative block. Titles on paper decide who counts as human under the rules. They are soldiers by mission, but not by uniform. A wireless operator parachutes in civilian clothes to avoid attention and to blend with markets and trams. A courier rides a bicycle on a lane flanked by workers. A partisan slips messages through a bakery line. The work is military, but the disguise is civilian. Under German practice, uniformed soldiers are POWs. Out-of-uniform fighters are spies or bandits. The category determines everything. A captured people agent faces the same danger, but the woman's case layers on German contempt. Propaganda calls her a gun. Neutral scholars note that while formal orders sometimes allow for POW treatment, many frontline units, especially on the Eastern Front, did not. Some executed women fighters on the spot. Others marched them to camps. Few survived to reach prisoner of war camps in Germany. Inside occupied France and Germany, the NN label can erase her entirely. The night and fall decree authorizes seizure and transport into the Reich. Trial by special courts or disposal without notice. Families receive no letters. Resistance networks hear rumors that nothing. Years later, a post-war investigator opens a folder and finds only a transfer slip with a missing destination. She was a combatant, then she was a case file, then she was gone. Mini-cliff. No status means no appeal, and no appeal means speed. Ravensbrück. The camp's administrative prison has 2 stories and 78 cells arranged around an atrium. A design built for control. The floor is polished by years of boots. The light is poor by design. Standing punishment and dark confinement are non-graphic phrases, but they signal a system that prized obedience through exhaustion. The cell building is where special prisoners come before transfers or decisions. It's where notes and narrow handwriting decide whether a name is sent onward or remains here indefinitely. Ravensbrück functioned as a center for women deemed politically dangerous, partisans, couriers, and agents. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum describes the diversity of the prisoner population and the camp's role in the broader system. While many women performed forced labor in workshops and factories, prisoners flagged for special handling met the prison regime first. The place is designed to break rhythm and will, not graphically but relentlessly. They were isolated, they were documented, they were prepared for what came next, transfer or the yard. The cell building is a pause, not a reprieve. Natzweiler Struthof sits in the Vosges, a small facility with steep slopes and a view that shouldn't belong to a prison. It becomes infamous for arrivals who do not exist on paper. On July 6, 1944, 4 women arrive. André Borel, Vera Ley, Diana Roden, and Sonia Olshanesky. A witness later testifies Berlin intends their disappearance. There are no register entries. There is a cremation and an emptiness where signatures should be. The forensic markers are chilling in their mundanity. A gate record that mentions a special transport but names no one. A work detail barred from a corridor. A crematorium log time that corresponds to no official death notice. This is what disappearance looks like administratively. Routine fragments without the connective tissue of identity. Years later, families will wait for pins on a map for remains, for anything that resembles closure. Instead, they get a location, a date, and the sentence not entered in the camp book. For Sonia Olshanesky, recognition itself is delayed. She is not listed on an early SOE memorial because of her recruitment status. Local rather than commissioned, commemoration becomes another ledger to fight. Wikipedia system can erase you 2 ways, by killing you and by liberation doesn't have judgment. For Soviet citizens, it can start with order number 270 frames surrenders treason in 1941, and though combat circumstances ranged from encirclement to collapse, the principle at birth of the battlefield, the NKVD creates special purpose camps. They are named filtration camps to screen returning POWs and civilians. It's a bureaucratic policy that nonetheless feels like erasure to her family. The Natzweiler Memorial Site, the Ravensbrück Memorial, and National Archives work to document and educate, but the initial design to leave no trace means historians and families must stitch together truth from witness depositions, camp architecture, and scattered ledgers. Museums evolve. Exhibitions open. A cell door is preserved. A chair sits under glass, close enough to touch but not to sit. The work resists closure and invites responsibility. The last battlefield is the archive, Natzweiler Struthof, Alsace, night of July 5-6, 1944. The train grinds against the grade as it climbs into the Vosges. In the wagon, 4 women brace for every lurch. They are not shackled. They are watched. A guard checks his watch as the carriage clicks over points. Somewhere below, a valley sleeps and a dog barks as if to insist that normal life continues. At the station, the platform lamps throw long rectangles on the ground. The air is thin and colder than expected. An official waits with 2 SS men. They exchange a brief, quiet conversation. No names, just the phrase "special prisoners." The road to the camp twists as if reluctant. As the truck approaches the gate, the compound emerges like geometry. Barbed wire, Hudson rows, a tower. The guardhouse light is clinical. The clerk inside lifts a pen, instinctively searching for the ledger. The officer shakes his head almost imperceptibly. The pen hovers in the air and then goes down. From the truck bed, one woman, youngest of the 4, memorizes silhouettes the way she once memorized radio schedules. She can't see the crematorium, but she notices the geometry again. Angles. Angles lead to decisions. Decisions lead to orders. Orders lead to doors. Inside, the camp reads with a radio. A cough from a hut, a clank of metal from the kitchen. The murmur of an argument abruptly cut off. The administrative block. Paperwork is ready, stapled, unintentionally incomplete. Transport receipt. From codes room 2. They are escorted into a holding space. It's bare but sweat. The floor smells of disinfectant. One takes off her shoe to adjust a sock. Another squeezes her eyes shut and lets out a sound. Precisely as taught in training, calming her pulse against a wall. In another room, an officer pours coffee into a white cup. He stares at the brown surface as if answers might rise to it. A phone rings once and stops. He sets down the cup and picks up a thin folder containing brief notes, some typed, some handwritten, initials in monitor. There is no judgment, no docket, no advocate, no court. There is a chain of command and intent. Disappearance. You cannot file an appeal in a void. Near dawn, the door opens onto the yard where the day will wear a blue tint before the sun lifts. The women stand, shoulders squared. They do not speak. The officer reads a sentence like a weather report. The yard receives it quiet and absolute. Afterward, the administrative machine completes itself. An entry is made in the crematorium record. Time, capacity, temperature. The page looks like any other page in a maintenance log. Routine banalities, how systems hide extraordinary acts. In the days and years to come, investigators will walk this same road. They will place themselves under the drooping wire of a fence and try to match testimonies to topography. They will find the chimney first. It is impossible to miss. And then the space where paperwork should be but isn't. They will stand in the quiet and hear only birds and distant road noise. They will look up, imagining the slope of the mountain and the way the path runs down into the valley. They will think about classification, language, and human courage. They will think about how much was done and how little was written down. And somewhere in another archive, a mother will open a letter that offers only a place name. For some, a place name is the best the world can do. The train came at night. The records stayed blank. U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and memorial accounts document the July 1944 executions of 4 SOE women at Natzweiler without standard registration. Witness testimony confirms their unrecorded status and the RSHA's intent. 2 more anchors in the debates they carry. Order number 270, Moscow, 1941. Stalin's directive frames surrender as treason and authorizes severe penalties, shaping later treatment of repatriated POWs. The Russian Presidential Library references the order among documents of 1941. Scholarly summaries attest to its impact. Historians debate exact enforcement by year and rank, but the order's existence and tone are clear. NKVD filtration camps, USSR, 1941-46. Originally special purpose camps. Order 00735, Dec 28, 1941. Renamed filtration camps. Order 00100, Feb 20, 1945. They screened millions of returnees. Outcomes varied. Release, redrafting, labor battalions, or transfer to the NKVD. The evidence base includes Soviet orders cited by archives and modern syntheses. Historians such as Sheila Fitzpatrick note that a meaningful minority of returning POWs were punished, though proportions differed among civilians versus POWs. Over time, medicine versus practice captured Soviet women fighters. Scholarship summarized in reputable overviews indicates inconsistency. The RKH firmly stated women combatants should be treated as POWs, yet many frontline units executed them and redirected them into ad hoc killings. Few survived to reach camps in Germany. never was. For the Germans, Nacht und Nebel was an administrative removal, not just bodies from streets, but identities from paperwork. The mechanism was startlingly simple. Deny the family notification, forbid correspondence, avoid entries in local registers, centralize decisions in security offices. The notations, when they existed, were sterile. Protective custody, special, transfer. The euphemisms were the point. They were a language that carried out orders without describing them. At Ravensbrück, the cell building enlisted architecture in the work of classification. It separated prisoners from special prisoners, political from criminal, work detail from punishment. It turned a camp into a diagram. The diagram governed bodies. The diagram had a key, labels. At Natzweiler, the choice not to enter 4 names in a book did more than hide a crime. It demonstrated how bureaucracies weaponize the absence of information. The crematorium log, separated from the prisoner register, provided no human link. When the Allies came asking, the camp could shrug. We have no such names. That is not denial. It is design. Across the front lines, the Soviet state's filtration system reasserted a different classification logic. Returnees were not heroes by default. They were cases to be sorted. In that queue stood women who had been medics, wireless operators, and scouts. The system presumed risk. It demanded proof of loyalty after survival. That stance did not always produce imprisonment. Many were released, but it extended the war's habit of turning people into files. Category decided fate. A consistent pattern reveals itself. When states face threats, they redraw the borders of legal status. Gender compounds the redraw. A woman who fought challenged was domestic ideal. She fit no comfortable temporary classification, provided the pretext to make her legible and disposable. This is why the fates of Noor and Violette Szabo matter then and matter now. Their endings, Ravensbrück's execution, were not isolated tragedies. They are case studies in a system that learned to operate without witnesses. The paperwork tells you how. That's the reframing. Shock doesn't mean live in violence. It lives in administration. It lives in how the signature can build or erases you. It lives in word and hammer that moved people into a fog thick enough to outlast the war. The most dangerous weapon here was the stamp pad. The cost is measured in missing lives. A mother waits for a letter that never arrives. A daughter grows up under the weight of a posthumous medal. Its official citation polished by words that can't show the car that it took to reach it. A survivor returns to a desk where the questions presume betrayal. We chose a tight geography. Nazi-occupied Europe from 1943 to 1945, and the Soviet filtration years that followed. Not because the phenomenon was limited there, but because precision beats generalization. Within this boundary, the record is painfully clear. Captured women who fought were often reclassified to remove them from the protections of law. Some were executed without trial. Others were held in punitive cell blocks or made to vanish administratively. Liberation didn't guarantee dignity. For some, it meant interrogation. What do we learn about power? That it prefers loose categories when tight ones would save lives. That it trusts ledgers until ledgers might incriminate. And then it trusts memory because memory can be dismissed as subjective. Return to that courtyard image. 4 women in the blue light before sunrise. The ledger closed, and then widen the frame years later to a museum display with that same ledger under glass. The book is there now. The names are still absent. The distance between those facts is everything historians must cross. One line to carry with you. They fought with radios and bicycles. Their enemies fought with labels and silence. Next time, we'll travel to another front and another century. The women's battalions of the Russian Civil War, praised in parades, punished in barracks. What happens when a revolution asks women to fight, then forgets to let them live as veterans? If this film helped you see the hidden architecture of wartime punishment, how a system turns people into cases, subscribe and tell us in the comments. Which story should we document next? Polish women soldiers in 1939 or Kurdish women fighters in the 2010s? Your suggestions steer our research.